Welcome in. It is the North Side Baseball Podcast. This is episode 3. However you get your podcast, we appreciate you tuning in. I am Mitch Widmeyer. He is Jason Ross. Jason, we are inching ever closer to the Tokyo series between the Chicago Cubs and Los Angeles Dodgers. Obviously a weird setup this year for the Cubs. You have that series, then a gap, and then you have when the rest of baseball with the rest of the teams are going to have their opening days, and the Cubs will have that as well. And I think we talked about it in episode 1, how they kind of get the short end of the stick because they'll get 2 of the Dodgers' best arms, and then there's a break, and they'll get some of the best arms as they get going in April as well. But appreciate you jumping back on. How have things been, and are you, like I and many other Cubs fans, just kind of itching for the Tokyo series, which is around the bend?
Thanks for having me back on. I'm doing well. I'm counting down the seconds. I'm actually really excited about the season starting, especially with, I guess, spoiler alert, Matt Shaw will be in Tokyo. That was just confirmed just a little bit ago, and we'll talk about that more later. But that makes it even more exciting. It's going to be hard not to want to watch opening day with 2 Japanese starters going against each other in Tokyo, Suzuki, Matt Shaw's debut, Kyle Tucker's debut. I am very excited about it, and I will be getting up very early in the morning to watch those games. So
I was going to say the only
thing
bad
I'm not
part,
excited about.
Yeah, the only bad part is the first pitch time. It's 5 a.m. Central Standard Time, I believe, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm Eastern time. It's the one time where I actually feel like the time zones are working a little bit better for me. I get to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is 1 hour later than 5, and I'll take that at this case.
Yeah, East Coast time is crazy for like Sunday night football, Monday night football during the NFL season. Like you don't get it till like 8:30, 8:20 p.m. that window, which that's crazy. So 5 a.m. Central Standard Time is not ideal, but it's the first series. There's going to be a lot of people up and watching in the States, obviously. We've got a bevy of topics to roll through today, Jason. For those watching on our website, Northside Baseball, the YouTube channel, you can see them listed. We'll get to the first one. I mean, it's hard to ignore the spring. Like you just mentioned a bunch of names, like Kyle Tucker's debut, Matt Shaw's debut, seeing Shota Imanaga going against the Dodgers in Tokyo in this series. All of it awesome, incredible, going to be fun. PCA, Pete Crow-Armstrong, he's having a massive spring, entering play today. Whenever you watch this, we're talking Tuesday. It's a .520 batting average, a 1.540 OPS, 3 homers, 25 at bats, 10 RBI, multiple viral plays, which I think will become the norm for him, whether it's his glove in center field or more so on the base paths. And those are the viral plays we've seen so far this spring. He had one, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, where he stole second, ended up scoring on a ball that trickled into like shallow center field. Little league home runs. The dude is absolutely electric. He's only 22. How are you sort of like tempering your expectations? Because I feel like for a lot of people, they just keep going up with PCA, where we have to remind ourselves the guy has not been, he wasn't, a full-time player wire to wire from April to the end of September last season. Like this will be his first full season in the bigs. He's only 22, but it is hard not to get giddy about what PCA could potentially be for the Cubs, really both offensively at the dish and with his glove in center.
It's hard not to. He's so much fun. I listed off all of those things that I'm excited about on opening day, and none of them could be the most exciting player in baseball. I mean, anytime he's on the bases, he can score. He's one pitch away from scoring, whether he hits the ball to center field and he keeps it in, he hits it over the wall. It really doesn't matter. He's capable of scoring. So he's going to be a human highlight reel this year, and it's hard not to be a little excited. If we're going to temper expectations a little bit, because I tried to do that. That was one of the things that I worked, and I kind of looked for some places where can I tamp myself down and not get too over the moon. First, I think, I looked over his Baseball Savant page, and I looked at first half, second half. And even in that second half, when he was absolutely exploding, there were still some imperfect moments. He's still swinging a lot. He's clearly always going to swing a lot. When you swing a lot, good things happen and bad things happen. Swinging and missing. He's going to make some weak contact. He can outrun that, obviously. But this is why I'm trying to keep it kind of limited on everything. It's easy to think he's going to be 20% better than league average. He's going to be the best defensive player in center field. He's going to be the best base runner in baseball. But I think a more realistic expectation is one of my favorite baseball savant and Fangraph pages is the Rocky center fielder Brenton Doyle. I'm Brenton Doyle fan number one. I absolutely love this guy. 2 years ago when he came up with the Rockies, he had the craziest baseball savant page because he's basically 1% in every offensive category you could imagine, except for power. He can hit a home run every once in a while, but 99th percentile speed, 99th percentile defense, 99th percentile base running. This is the fastest guy in baseball, plays great defense, couldn't hit. And I think if you look at PCA, Brenton Doyle's kind of a pretty good little bit of a comp because if you look at Brenton Doyle last year, Brenton Doyle was a 97 WRC plus hitter. Is that league average? No, but he doesn't need to be league average. If you're going to be the best center fielder and the best base runner, if you're a league average hitter, then you become Brenton Doyle. And Brenton Doyle had a really good season last year. His defense was down just a little bit from the year before, but he was a 3-4 win player out in center field with a fairly unimpressive batting line. It was a batting line at Coors of a 328 WOBA. That's pretty good. But we're not blowing off the roof, but he's a good player with that. So I think, if we want to tamp expectations down, if PCA is 5% worse than league average, if he's a great defensive player, he's still going to be really good. So like that's my tamped down expectations for a PCA season. There's always the kind of issue, like he really relies on his legs. What happens if he blows a leg out? But we can play that game with just about anybody in the league who has like one elite talent that they just kind of stand above and beyond. Any pitcher is one pitch away from ending the season. And, with PCA, even as excited he is, he could be one run away from doing some damage. But we take that out of the equation. I think even tamping it down, I'm really excited. I think he's going to have a great season.
Yeah, and like we were saying, it's hard not to get more excited watching him this spring. One thing I do to try to calm it down for myself a little bit as far as the expectations is like it is spring training. We know he's not going to hit 520. The 3 homers and 25 at bats is great. The OPS of 1.540. But I look at it on like the flip side, Jason, where like Kyle Tucker's had a really quiet spring and kind of a head scratching spring at the dish. But then I tell myself like that's not going to be Kyle Tucker. Like Kyle Tucker is going to figure it out. His resume is long enough. It speaks loud enough. Like we know the Kyle Tucker that we've seen for large portions during spring training is not the Kyle Tucker the Cubs are going to get. Just like with PCA, it'd be awesome if this was the PCA we saw. It's just not realistic, just like it is with Tucker. So there's certainly some give and take. One thing I love about PCA too, amongst the glove, the speed, all that good stuff, he is like very personable. Like he plays with such energy. But it seems like that's just who he is. It's not like, oh, I'm super fast, I have a great glove. This is just like the player I am. Like I saw him, I don't know who it was, but Mark, he had tweeted out, he was like video bombing one of the reporters as she was doing like a stand-up before the game. And then like the hair with it, it's like bleach blonde, but he's got the blue stars in it.
Blue stars, yeah.
Yeah, like the player he is on the diamond for the Cubs, it also seems like off of it, he's just sort of like a bolt of energy, which is incredible. I would imagine it's hard to like keep up with his day-to-day life, who's ever involved with that, friends, family-wise, which, yeah, I'm excited about his prospects this year. And I don't know, we have a lineup talk that we'll get to at the tail end of this, but for as much excitement as there is around PCA, I don't believe, Jason, and I would like to get your take on this, it's not like there's an enormous amount of pressure for PCA to be the guy like in the lineup, right? Like the Cubs aren't going to be looking to him every day to be, oh, we need him to produce, we need him to deliver. Like his glove will do a lot of that, his speed defensively in center field. It's kind of a rare blend of one of your top prospects that you brought up last year really came on in the second half, having an incredible spring, yet there's not a ton of pressure, I don't believe, on his shoulders to like carry this franchise or carry this team. I don't see it through that lens whatsoever.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't think that that's going to really be put on him this year. There was a really cool article. I don't know if you caught it. Joel Schusterman of Yahoo Sports posted it. It was like an hour or two ago, and I happened to read about it. And you had been talking about, that there's not too much pressure on his shoulders, and that's kind of basically what Craig Counsell told him when he first came up. It's basically just come up here, like they compared him to Bryce Terron from the Brewers when Craig said it was like basically like you guys are from the same area, you guys were on the same kind of showcase, you have a lot of the same talents, your speed, your glove, like just come up here and do those things. We're not looking for you to be like the guy in the lineup, but I think anything he adds is bonus. Matt Trueblood had a really cool article on Northside maybe 2 days ago about talking about how his speed can really be utilized in that 7, 8, 9 area. And I think that that's actually a really cool thing when we think of, traditional lineups and, getting ahead of ourselves on lineup talk. We think traditional lineups, you got to put the fast guy first. Otherwise he's going to get clogged on the bases. On the flip side, what if you have a guy in the 7 hole right before Miguel Amaya, and you're not really expecting Amaya to be, like the guy offensively this year, but all of a sudden, you get PCA on base, he steals second, he uses that speed, he gets over to third, and then Amaya hits a ground ball to second base, he scores. Well, all of a sudden you're using maybe what Miguel Amaya does, which is put a lot of the balls in play, and you let that speed in front of him really add to it. So I don't think he needs to be the guy very often. One of the things that I think this is kind of a poor 1-to-1. So every time I use comparisons, I try my best to remember it's not a 1-to-1, but I think when I looked at his rolling WOBA chart over the course of the season, it was very peak and valley. I think PCA is either going to be great or he's going to be kind of not great at the plate and kind of wild and a little out of control. He reminds me a lot in that aspect of, if we go back 20 years or, 15 years, Alfonso Soriano, where I think you're going to have these like 3 to 4 week runs where Pete Crow-Armstrong is going to be hitting the ball in play. He's going to be stealing second base. He's going to be stealing third base. He's going to have these little league home runs. He's going to be making all these amazing plays offensively. And then there's going to be 3 or 4 weeks where he's going to go up there and he's going to strike out a lot. He's going to swing and miss a bunch. He's going to get frustrated. But I think that's just who he is. I think he's a very emotional player. And that's just my feeling from watching him. I've never met Pete, but he seems to play a lot of his emotions. He's excited, and that's a good thing. But when we play off of emotions, sometimes those things can kind of be used against us in those like highs and lows. And just kind of looking at the chart, that's kind of the feeling that I came away with it. But when you have Kyle Tucker and you have Seiya Suzuki and you have Nico Horner and you have Dansby Swanson and you have Ian Happ, Michael Busch could have a really big season. I think any day Pete Crow-Armstrong might be the 7th most important person in the lineup. And that's good. That's really good for him. So he can blow up when he blows up positive. And when he's struggling, he still has speed. He can still play defense. He still can affect the game in many ways. It just might not be in that like Pete Crow-Armstrong's hitting a couple doubles and stealing bases, because he's getting on base a bunch. He might be getting on base some, but he still has skills to use.
It is the Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Jason Ross. I am Mitch Widmeyer. Rolling through some Cubs topics as we, again, inch closer to that Tokyo series between the Cubs and the Dodgers. Craig Counsell had an interesting quote that I saw. I don't know if it was over the weekend. It was a few days ago. He was talking about pitchers' arms they have both at the major league level down to the minor league level. And he had said, Jason, the direct quote was, at some point this season, we got to call Cade Horton up. I can't remember if it was with you or with Matt last week, but I talked about Cade Horton with one of you guys and fully expecting, obviously, he will start in the minors. He's coming off a season-ending injury, hadn't seen, live batters since last June, and you're not going to just throw that dude into the ring and be like, hey, here we go, whether it be bullpen or, a rotation spot. So he'll obviously start the season in the minors, but to hear Craig Counsell, like he didn't really slice it down the middle. He didn't, veer one direction halfway and then go back. Like his direct quote was, at some point this season, we got to call Cade Horton up, which obviously like put my antennas up a little bit because I start thinking bullpen, starter, the rotation set. And Craig Counsell's not going to say that like predicting that there's going to be injuries in the rotation. Like that'd be, not a real boost of confidence to the 5 guys they have right now on the staff for the starter. So it just got my mind rolling a little bit. And really, like, do you like the expectations put in place by Craig Counsell saying, like, hey, at some point we got to have Cade Horton up here this year with this club?
I love the confidence from Craig on that. Craig Counsell really hasn't minced words when it comes to the young players of this spring training. He was very clear about Kevin Alcantara that he's going to be somebody that we're going to see. And if we look at that breakout series that we've got that starts tomorrow or 2 days from now on Thursday, they play their first game. Kevin's not on that breakout roster. And that is because he's going to probably end up in Tokyo. He's not going to probably be on the actual roster proper. He's probably on the taxi squad, but he spoke positive about Kevin. And he said that there's going to be a couple times this year where Kevin is going to be a part of the Cubs, and he might not play a lot, but they seem to like that with their young players, where they don't really mind having a guy be on the bench for a week to 2 weeks. You're losing 25, 30 minor league plate appearances, but being with the team, they think maybe overshadows that. And I think when we talk Cade, I think two things. One, we can look at it maybe a little bit from that perspective, but maybe a little bit less. The Cubs really don't use their fourth position player. I think I saw somewhere like Edwin Rios spent 2 months on the team last year. Couldn't remember that. I forgot that Edwin Rios was a Cub. Luis Vasquez was on the team for 47 games. I think Luis Vasquez has an upside as a glove first shortstop, but I mean, he took like 14 plate appearances in that time. So they just don't use that spot. The bullpen works a little bit differently. So while I think Kevin might sit on the bench for a week and a half where he only gets 10 plate appearances over the course of a time period, if they call Cade Horton up, whether it's bullpen, whether it's rotation, they're going to use him. They might use him more like Jack Neely at the end of the season last year, where it was kind of like more in blowout-y games at first. And then Jack really wasn't ready. It seems like, Jack will probably spend the first little bit in Iowa this year, but I like hearing Craig say that. I think that tells you, one, that he's healthy. And I don't think Craig's saying that if he's not looking impressive. Two, it makes you feel like there's been some work. When we look at his Iowa data last year, at very minimum times, the fastball speed wasn't great. The fastball shape wasn't great. The slider took a little bit of a hit. So feeling like that's all back. And again, speaking of breakout series, we're going to get to see him pitch either on the 13th or the 15th because he's on that team. So we should probably see a couple innings, but I am excited that Craig is excited for him. Cade's one of those guys. I just really like watching Cade Horton. If you've never really watched him, the way I always kind of explain it is a lot of pitchers will try to go around you and Cade Horton will try to go through you. He goes straight through you, which is good. And it's also one of my biggest red flags with him. That fastball, he's got a little too much faith in it every once in a while, where if it's 2-0, he's going to challenge you with that fastball right down the gut. And I kind of wish he was a little bit more cautious with that. At some point, he's going to get caught with that. But I love watching Cade Horton pitch. So if the Cubs want to bring him up, more power to him. I want to see it.
What do you make of that philosophy that they exercise at points in time? You brought it up with a couple of names from last year where it seems like the Cubs don't mind. It's almost like call a guy up for a couple of weeks and they think, hey, being in a major league clubhouse dugout, seeing how these players go about their business day to day, how they prepare for a game, and how it differs maybe even at the AAA or the AA level, and just getting a little bit of a taste of that, even if they aren't getting, the reps that they would be getting at the minor league level, because I feel like a lot of organizations would go the other way, where they emphasize at bats, reps, all that stuff, where the Cubs have shown in at least a couple of examples, like they'd rather see certain guys just get a little whiff of that major league experience, knowing that we're not going to keep them up here for 3 or 4 months and just have them rot on the bench. But I do think it's an interesting sort of angle to take with it. I don't mind it whatsoever, knowing that it's not like a long-term blueprint that they lay out. It's just sort of getting a little taste for these guys, like I said, whereas I do believe a lot, I don't know if it's the majority, but a lot of organizations, Jason, would say we got to get these guys as many reps as possible before we call them up to the major league level.
And I think you're probably right. I think conventional wisdom says reps. Whereas the Cubs have basically said, listen, we're going to trade 30 reps here or there, and we'll trade that for experience. I think as fans, we sometimes, because we're not seeing the games, we forget that they are taking BP. They're working on the side. When they don't have a game, they are practicing. These are major league players. They are consistently baseballing all the time. When I have an off day on Saturday, I'm not always practicing my craft. They are. So I think maybe some of that rep gets mitigated there. A slight appeal to authority, but if you look at the Cubs player development over the last, even since pandemic time, you look at their roster and look at their best players, and you're talking Ian Happ, you're talking Justin Steele, you're talking Nico Horner, you're looking at some of their relievers, guys like Porter Hodge, Crow-Armstrong, Michael Busch. These are all players that they either took a large part of developing during over that time period, made big changes. Like Ian Happ has had major approach changes that they've worked on. They've developed PCA basically outside of 2 weeks of plate appearances with the Mets. And then you have Michael Busch, who struggled with the Dodgers, came to the Cubs, and he up and down at times, but still really good season. They've done a good job with transitioning young players to the major leagues. They've taken major league players and transitioned them into new parts of their games. So I have a hard time saying, oh yeah, no, Kevin Alcantara would be so much better with 2 weeks against, teams against the International League than getting the experience with the Cubs, getting into a couple of games. I think those things offset, and you can look with the Cubs, they've got a track record. It's working right now. As they take players in, they are transitioning to the major leagues. I feel really confident that the way that they're doing that. I think it'd be a little bit different if their prospects weren't performing, if it looked like they needed more reps. But Ben Brown, if you told me at the beginning of last season Ben Brown was ready for the major leagues, I would have told you no. There was 0% chance he was ready for the major leagues. He struggled at AAA the year before he was hurt. What does he do? Comes right up after opening day. For a while, looked like one of the Cubs' best starting pitchers. Looked completely major league ready. It doesn't miss a beat. So even when they just kind of put players in, they're transitioning players and they're being successful. And so I feel really good about if Kevin sits on the bench for a little bit, if Cade is just kind of around as an 8th pitcher for a little bit, out of that bullpen, even if it's for 2 weeks, having them there and having their stuff available, it's always positive.
One of these young prospects that they will hope to develop and mold into an everyday player is Matt Shaw. We found out on Tuesday via the Cubs, via Craig Counsell, said that Matt Shaw will be making the trip to Japan with the team, which kind of maybe a bit of a change up. I feel like most of the reports I saw, Jason, leaned towards, Matt Shaw's probably not going to make the trip to Japan, and now we know he is. So fair to assume that he'll be starting at third base. I can't imagine they're taking him over there for the series with the idea of just having him sit. And we talked about, expectations, PCA, some of these younger bats in the lineup. Shaw's an interesting one where, how much pressure will be on him as a rookie to deliver right away. Again, a guy that probably not going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 in the order, but a rookie, high expectations, a lot of excitement around him. With PCA, we saw it at the major league level a little bit last year. Haven't seen it yet with Shaw. How much pressure do you think is on his shoulders with expectations and that big leg kick of his that he has every time he digs into the box?
One of the things that I think he's a little bit lucky with the team that he's on, because especially coming out of the gates, while I think people are going to be watching for Matt Shaw, I'm going to be watching for Matt Shaw too. I think he's got a little bit of insulation at the beginning of the season. First off, we're in Tokyo, so you're going to have a lot of media pressure is going to be looking at Yamamoto versus Imanaga in Game 1. They're going to be talking about Ohtani returning. They're going to be talking about Suzuki. Then you come down and you've got your new additions. You've got Kyle Tucker. What is he going to look like in his first games as a Cub? Are they going to re-sign him? So we're talking about all of these things. And then we're getting to maybe Matt Shaw, right? So you've got, I think, at least in the Tokyo series, the spotlight will be off of him. It'll be on him. It's his major league debut. We're going to talk about it either way, but it's going to be a little bit less. It's not like he's coming in on opening day on a 74-win Chicago Cubs team that looks like they're going to be awful. And you're looking at him and you're like, well, what's exciting about the Cubs this year? Matt Shaw is making his debut. It's kind of a little bit different. I think expectations for the Cubs and all of that will help shield him a little bit. I guess if you want a negative, it's that Cam Smith has had a really big spring training. I'm okay with it. Like when we talked about PCA, it's practice. And I'm glad for Cam Smith that he's doing well. I am still not the biggest Cam Smith guy. We will see where that goes. But good for Cam Smith. I want nothing but the best for him. But spring training. And I think if you look at it, speaking of Shaw, he hasn't had the greatest spring training. Did hit a double today. Looks a little bit better. But I think going to Japan's the right decision. I didn't know if he was going to go the second they started playing him, like right at the beginning of March. And I was like, we got 18 days to lead up. I felt the last week or so, he was probably trending in that direction. I'm glad he's going in that direction. I actually think it's a good series for him to get his debut. Just looking at data and looking at what Shaw does well and what Sasaki and Yamamoto don't do well. Actually, I would not be surprised to see Shaw have a good series in Japan based on what we're looking at. So I'm glad he's going. I think it's the right decision, and I'm excited about it, even if I think he might be a little overshadowed. This is going to be one of the things I'm most excited about looking at.
Two things feeding off of that, Jason. One, I agree with you. For someone specifically like Matt Shaw, rookie, high expectations, making the trip to Japan, they made that announcement on Tuesday. I like that there's this little 2-game series, even though it's against the Dodgers, and the Dodgers are a powerhouse, World Series favorites again. But you get this series, and you mentioned all the other storylines that are involved. But outside of that, you have the set in Tokyo, and then you get a little buffer, some time to come back, sort of reflect on what went right, what didn't go right. And it's a small sample size, but for someone like Matt Shaw, it's not playing one series in April and then, hey, we're going on the road to Arizona and then San Diego and then back to Wrigley and then back on the road again. Like there's a buffer. There's a nice little time period where he can be like, okay, I got my feet wet, big league level. Here's what I liked. Here's what I didn't like. Let's try to adjust. But there's a little bit of time before you get back into it then, end of March, beginning of April when the games start counting again. And the second thing, the Cam Smith part, no Cubs fan will be upset, in my opinion. I think it'd be foolish to be upset if Cam Smith turns out to be an all-star player, as long as the Cubs open up the checkbook for Kyle Tucker next offseason, right? Like,
agreed.
If Cam Smith's an awesome player, but the Cubs re-ink Kyle Tucker to a 4, 5, 6-year deal, whatever it is, you'd be me. I'd be like, good for Cam Smith. We still have Kyle Tucker. If they don't, and Kyle Tucker walks, and then Cam Smith turns out to be that player, then I think 3, 4, 5 years down the road, it becomes sort of a problem. Perhaps, at least for that, little bit of time where it's brought up, or I guess it depends how much it's referenced. But I saw the spring he was having too, and that was the first thought that crossed my mind is if the Cubs just sign next offseason Kyle Tucker to a long-term extension, no one's going to be mad if Cam Smith turns out to have a hell of a career in Houston.
Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of that comes back to Tucker. And I do think it'll come back to Shaw a little bit too. With Shaw taking over the third base. I know there's even been some talk that Cam Smith could make him the Astros proper out of spring training. I'd seen a couple of articles suggesting he's an option for them at first base. I don't think that that's going to happen. The Astros, I know that they've got an injury situation right there with Walker. I think Walker's kind of banged up a little bit right now. But I don't think he's going to make the major leagues straight out of AA. He's got like 15 appearances above A ball. So I don't think that's going to happen regardless of the spring training. But yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come back to that Kyle Tucker and making sure that we keep Tucker, because that's I guess that's an important guy, and that would be the guy that I'd be building around if I were the Cubs. And I do tend to think that there is enough tea leaves out there to make you believe that the Cubs think the same thing. Just listening to how Jed Hoyer talks about it and looking at who Kyle Tucker is and what the Cubs like. But I think a lot of that's going to come back to how good are the Cubs this year, and is Jed Hoyer around next year? Because with him only 1 year left to go, I would not be surprised if that has some sort of a hang up on the Cubs' ability to offer Kyle Tucker that extension.
I have no doubts, no reservations that Jed Hoyer probably wants Kyle Tucker around for the long haul, right? It's probably that tier above him where they want him around, but how far are you going to stretch it out financially?
I think if you ask Jed, I think Jed loves Kyle Tucker. I mean, if you just look at Kyle Tucker, like Cubs players, what are Cubs players like built around? They're built around hit tool. They don't strike out a lot. They play good defense. They're positive on the base runner. What Kyle Tucker does all these things. He's versatile. You can move him off of right field down the road. He could play first base eventually. You could be a DH down the road. Like, this is like Jed Hoyer's like guy. If Jed Hoyer could build a player, I think, if he can't build like a Juan Soto, and I would wonder if Juan Soto is a Jed Hoyer guy because he can't play defense all that well. Jed loves Kyle Tucker. So I think if there's a positive, Jed Hoyer wants Kyle. I think if you look at the way that the Cubs attacked Kyle Tucker, I think that's a Jed Hoyer guy. Will the money be there? That's always the question with the Cubs is there any money? Do they have any appetite to go to the 10-year deal that's probably going to be needed to get Kyle Tucker to sign? That's always the question. And, but I think if it was just up to Jed, I think Kyle Tucker is almost like the guy, like just down to the T. I think he's a Jed guy.
And don't let it fool you for those listening. When you said, is the money there? We both chuckled. There is pain behind Jason and I both chuckling.
Very much. Yes.
We are not laughing with joy and excitement. There's pain behind it.
No, that's not a laughing with, that's a laughing at situation.
Yeah. It is the Northside Baseball Podcast. Mitch Whitmire, Jason Ross here with you. We've teased it. We've talked about it a little bit. The Tokyo series coming up. Yamamoto, Sasaki, Shoto going for the Cubs. What are your expectations? Like, I'd like them to get one. If they get one, I'll be happy with that. There is going to be. It's a long season, right? Like 162 games, but when you're traveling halfway across the world, you'd like to fly back with at least one in your pocket. You don't want a completely sour taste in your mouth. So, what are your expectations going up against the Dodgers in that? I mean, the arms and the lineup, that lineup's crazy, just like it was last year.
The Dodgers are ridiculous. They're a great team. If you're going to catch these guys, this is the best time to catch them, I think. Just looking at Yamamoto, you look at Sasaki, and especially Sasaki. And this is no shade towards Roki. I think there's so much upside there. But, and this is where I'm going to catch my butt, he is young. He has never pitched in the major leagues. He has, wherever you want to put the NPB compared to AA, AAA, it is not major leagues. He's not facing major league hitters across the board. And you've got some positives. If you look at major league hitters, regardless of velocity, if you throw the ball down the middle, major league hitters hit it. Like even 100 miles an hour, you throw it down the middle, they hit it. And what does Roki have a tendency to do, especially against right-handed hitters? That fastball leaks over the middle. It has arm side runs. So what he ends up doing is he ends up getting a little too far inside, or if he throws it on the outside, when it's going to leak back over the middle. He did not do all that great against right-handed hitters all the time. The splits in Japan didn't necessarily show that he was really struggling with right-handed hitters, but his fastball splitter combo, if you look at guys like Yamamoto, who we are also facing, and Cade Senga, two other Japanese fastball splitter guys, they both struggle against righties. Yamamoto had a 317 WOBA against right-handed hitters last year. Righties can hit Yamamoto, and he spins the ball better than Roki does. Roki does not have a great slider. Sasaki's slider is not great. He does not spin the ball well. I was just watching another kind of information dump on Sasaki versus Yamamoto. Yamamoto is spinning 2,700 RPMs on his breaking balls. It's like upper 80%, like mid 80% in terms of like his spin rate and everything. Sasaki's down to 2,200. So I think expectations, like if you want to catch Sasaki, this is the time. His slider probably hasn't made a lot of improvements yet. His fastball, it's good, but is it as good as it was a few years ago? The vertical and horizontal break wasn't as good last year in Japan as it was compared prior. So this is the time to go get him. And I think, if I was Seiya Suzuki, if I was Matt Shaw, if I was somebody like Carson Kelly, Justin Turner, one of these right-handed bats on the Cubs, I'd hope to get in against one of these guys. They're really good, but they struggle a little bit more against righties early in the season. They're not going to be in their full form. This is when I would want to hit them.
What are you hoping for out of Shota? Shota the showman, right? Like you talk about like PCA kind of bringing that spark and that jolt. Shota was that on the mound. Like he's not afraid to express his emotions when he's out there. And now he's, back in Japan for this Tokyo series. I'm super pumped for him and for this opportunity that he's getting. And this is not, to me, this is in no way the Cubs saying, oh, it's series in Tokyo, we got to pitch Shota. Like Shota earned it based off what he did last year coming into this season. Like it is a well-deserved nod for him to get an opportunity to pitch in this series against the Dodgers. And when we're kind of highlighting the excitement we have to see Shaw for the first time, to see PCA and how he looks early on after this mammoth spring that he's had so far, Shota is a guy like I'm super, super psyched to see what he puts on display against a daunting lineup. But I think it's a stage that he will embrace. He doesn't strike me, Jason, as someone who like the moment or the spotlight will be too big for him. He almost seems like he wants that. He doesn't view it as like a burden, like he embraces it. So I'm super pumped to see him out there too. I'm sure you are as well.
Oh, it's impossible not to be. Is there anybody on the planet who likes Chicago more than Shota Imanaga? Because I'm not quite certain there is. The man loves Chicago, and I love that about him. It's so hard not to root for him on the mound. I mean, you could see it right when he took to Wrigley last year in the cold. He's up there, hair's flowing. He's just loving every minute of it on the mound. I love watching him pitch. He's so much fun. And I like the way that he does things in kind of a different way. He's somebody who lives on a fastball that's 92 miles an hour, but the way that he's able to kind of get that to move and to spin is in such a unique way. I'm hoping that it goes well. I think if we want to be realistic about Shota's last season, I do think that Wrigley Field helped him out a little bit. He didn't give up maybe the home runs that we may have thought, but he also iterated over himself throughout the year. And you could tell that he knew that he couldn't just survive on that. I love that about him too. That, even when he's like leading the league in ERA, he's changing his pitch mix throughout the middle of the season to the end of the season. Going back to Matt, he wrote a couple articles on it on Northside in the offseason. And just seeing how he is always tinkering, he definitely earns that pitching philosopher nickname that he has. So I for his sake, I hope he goes out and he absolutely crushes it. This has got to be just a cool experience. And I know that he's going to be facing Yamamoto, who's probably going to be feeling the same thing that Shota is, but I like the Cubs, so I'm going to root for Shota over Yamamoto in the moment. But I'm excited about it. I think it'll be exciting for him. I can't wait to see him rack up a couple strikeouts early in the game and get the Tokyo Dome going, because I think he can get everybody on their side pretty quick.
Last thing I wanted to touch base with you on, Jason, the lineup, and this is not specific to the series against the Dodgers. It's kind of expanding out the horizon, zooming out the microscope, however you want to phrase it for the season. What player do you, I think most would agree, like Kyle Tucker, is the most important bat in this lineup, or the one that will have the most to say about how this Cubs offense comes to be or doesn't come to be? What player outside of Tucker to you is the most critical to the lineup's success this year? When I was thinking about, there's just so many different avenues and different directions you could go with this. Where do you start at with that discussion?
I'm going to go on the opposite end, because I thought about this and I said, who matters the most to the lineup throughout the season? And I came to the name of Miguel Amaya, which is not who I think most people would think of. When you're thinking of lineup, you're thinking of Ian Happ, you're thinking of Seiya Suzuki. I'm not worried about them. So I think you know what you're getting with those guys. You're getting a 120 RC plus with Ian Happ. He's going to hit from both sides. He's a good player. Seiya Suzuki, he's a 130 guy. He's arguably your second best hitter. Dansby Swanson, what's the differentiation? Maybe he's 3% worse than league average. Maybe he's 10% better than league average. Miguel Amaya makes the lineup for me because that is the spot. That's the one spot in the lineup that I don't really exactly know what I'm getting from. And this is an important year for him. If Miguel Amaya looks like the guy we saw in the second half. And I mean, the second half, Miguel Amaya was a monster. He was 30% better than league average. He upped his slugging percentage significantly. He struck out a little bit more, but not in like scary levels. Like, that guy is he's all-star. But and I'm not saying Miguel Amaya is going to be an all-star, but if Miguel Amaya is a league average catcher next year, that means 91 WRC plus, he's playing slightly better than league average, you solve catcher for potentially, for the most part, 3 to 4 years. You don't have to make a trade in July. You can, instead of a trade of need, you can make a trade of want. At that point, you're not overpaying for somebody. We don't have to go back down the Logan O'Hoppe Chronicles and see, like, what are the Cubs going to do? Are they going to have to go to Shea Langoliers, who I'm not a big fan of Shea Langoliers. He hits a lot of home runs, and he hits a lot of home runs. And I don't want to spend my assets that way. Does it force the Cubs to go to Moises Ballesteros before he's ready as a catcher? We saw the Cubs do that with Kyle Schwarber. And while I don't think Schwarber was ever going to be a catcher, he tore his ACL. That's kind of what ruined it. Maybe if they didn't have to go over that, they could teach him a little bit more. Maybe he's catching 30 games a year as opposed to never again. And I think if we can get Ballesteros in the minors a little bit longer, that's better for his development. It creates that length. If Miguel Amaya is a 95 WRC plus guy, 5% worse than league average, the Cubs will have the deepest lineup in arguably in baseball, because there's not going to be a single sore spot. What are your sore spots? You've got rookie Matt Shaw, PCA, who can score on any swing of the bat, even if he hits a dribbler to the pitcher, because it's liable to turn it into a little league home run. You have the middle guys who are all hitting. That Miguel Amaya catcher spot, I think, it's both the linchpin of the depth of the lineup. He can't be a 60 guy. If he's 40% worse than league average, again, the Cubs have a problem. And the backup is Carson Kelly, who had a great season last year. Not a good season the year before. He's never been a reliable everyday starter. And then you're worrying about how can the Cubs survive until July, and maybe they can get another catcher. Who's the other catcher? I don't really know. So that's why when I really looked at the lineup, the person that I settled on the most was Miguel Amaya. I think he's the most important person in the lineup, and he can settle that position for 4 years, or he can force the Cubs to overpay to fix that position as they attempt to win the division.
Dude, I love that answer. I didn't, like, when I was going through it, obviously I considered Amaya, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I can't argue or dispute or rebut anything you just said. I love that answer. For sake of, being different and not going against the grain, but saying something and having a different take than what you had, I agree with you on Happ. Like, you could say outside of Tucker, hey, Ian Happ's the most critical part of the lineup because he's at the top of it, but you know what you're getting with Ian Happ. Like you said, same thing with Say. Like, you could look at Say and say, hey, if he's going to be the DH, the glove is not a factor. So the bat is really the only thing that matters. So he has to produce. But with Seiya, I think the sample size is almost large enough where you kind of know what you're going to get. I think Dansby Swanson is an option that I would go with because of what I said about Happ and Seiya.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he took a step back last year from what we had seen throughout his career at the plate. And so now, my mind is wandering a little bit, Jason, wondering, like, is the Dansby we saw last year the Dansby going forward? Will he figure it back out? Because he went through some long, pretty brutal stretches at the plate last season, and I think you just need more than what they got from him last year. He's not going to be a huge power bat. He's not going to be a guy that you rely on day in and day out to be, the focal point of the batting order. But I think you have to get, I would say, a lot more than what they got from Dansby last year. Again, especially with those prolonged stretches at the dish where he was not good. So I'm hoping for a bounce back campaign for him offensively. You know what the glove is with him and what that's going to be. But I think there's some unknown with Dansby where I think we're agreeing. You don't have that with Happ. Like, at this point, you know what you're going to get. You don't have that as much with Suzuki, but there will be a little more pressure because the glove won't be, in play as much with him as the designated hitter. Dansby's the one to me just because, and I'll get your thoughts on it too. I think there's still question marks looming about, man, I hope that's not the Dansby going forward that we saw last year for large parts of the season offensively.
So looking at Dansby, I just pulled up his numbers on Fangraphs just real quick. I actually am more encouraged than I thought I would be just on a quick look. He really did struggle at the beginning of the season last year. Just looking at his numbers, I mean, he was a below 80 WRC plus for the first half of the season. The K rate was through the roof. It was like over 27%. This was more like early career Dansby Swanson that when they signed Dansby Swanson, I will be 100% honest with you. I didn't love the contract, and I didn't love Dansby Swanson. He had one really, really good year, and then the pandemic year. But we never seen his bat kind of stabilize. It was always kind of like, wow, 1 year he's really good, and a bunch of years he was terrible. He's really kind of flatlined as a pretty good hitter over the course of the last 4 years. You kind of more or less know what you're getting. And that first half was way out of sorts for him. We know that he had a hip injury. So you would almost expect his second half to be not good as he was working through that. And all he did was get better every month. Basically, from June, he was great. July, he was terrible. August and September, better and better. He lowered his strikeout rate 7% in the second half of the season. He upped his isolated power by from 130 to the 160s. His WRC plus was over 120. So I'm actually feeling pretty confident. I think maybe it was just kind of in a long slump. It wasn't really good. And that second half was much better. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe that 105 guy, over the course of the season is probably what we're going to see. Do I think he's a 120 guy over the course? No. Do I think he's an 80 guy over the course? No, but as he starts to hit that 30s, the glove is at some point it's going to regress a bit. Shortstop is a demanding position. We know the defense starts to regress around this age, even if it's just baby steps at first. But the bat's going to kind of probably be a little bit more important for him. So, I don't think that he can really be a 92 WRC plus guy every year going forward, because it's just less and less likely that his glove is going to be able to carry him to the heights. So actually that's a great answer. And I'm actually talking myself into, I almost not quite certain that Miguel Amaya is the answer anymore. It might actually be Swanson, because I'm just kind of like processing through it. I like that as an answer as well. I think it's a really good answer.
Let's get out of here on this. I just realized the next time we chat and have the podcast, the season will be underway for the Cubs. And so I'm wondering, I think almost everyone will say if the Cubs don't at least make the playoffs this year, it will be a wildly disappointing season. If I go, one layer farther back, Jason, if the Cubs don't win the division this year, would you consider that a disappointment? I guess, like, if they don't win the division, they could be a wild card. And then if they go on a run in the playoffs, it's like, great, it was a great season, which I would normally agree. But they're not in a division with the Dodgers. They're not in a division with the Phillies, the Braves, the Mets. Like, no disrespect to the Reds and the Pirates and the Cardinals and the Brewers, but it is there for the taking. You got to keep in mind what Milwaukee lost in the offseason with Devin Williams, with Willy Adames, and the Cardinals not really doing much of anything. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh bringing back some guys, but also banking in on a lot of that young talent to come to fruition maybe a year or two earlier than some other people expect. If the Cubs don't win the division this year, let's just take out a postseason run like being on the table. Like, if they didn't win the Central, would you consider it a disappointing season?
Yeah. I mean, if the Cubs don't win the division, they're probably not going to the playoffs. That's just the reality of the NL this year. I mean, you only have so many wild card spots, and who are you going to be for a wild card spot? Because you're going up against everybody who's not the Dodgers in the West. So that's Padres, Diamondbacks, Giants, who could look pretty decent. Maybe, they get a couple of things going their way. In the East, you've got the Phillies, you've got the Mets, you've got the Braves. One of those teams is going to win the division, and the other teams are going to be fighting for the playoffs. So you've got plenty of teams in the wild card. The Cubs have to win the division if they want to go to the playoffs. That's realistically their only path. There's other outcomes where, they could get in as a wild card, but I don't think it's realistic. So the Cubs basically have to win the division. When you look at the division, if they aren't beating the Brewers, if they're not beating the Reds, if they're not beating the Pirates, if they're not beating the Cardinals, barring something crazy going on with one of those teams just having too good of a season, then they're probably not beating the Phillies. They're not beating the Padres. They're not beating the Diamondbacks. I think Jed Hoyer's fired at that point, or not retained, however you want to consider it. I would consider that a major disappointment. I think this team has to be in the playoffs. They need to be in the playoffs. They probably have to win at least a playoff game to walk away with the season and feeling good about it. And that might change. Maybe the Cubs are like clearly going to the playoffs. They re-sign Kyle Tucker mid-season. They go to the playoffs. They lose both of the games. I think we can reassess that when we come back out of that, where it's like, okay, maybe they had a really tough matchup against, the Diamondbacks in the wild card. They had to face Corbin Burns and Zach Allen. They couldn't get over the hump, but we got Kyle Tucker for 10 years, so you don't have to worry about that. But if they come out of that, they don't win any playoff games. Even if they win the division, Kyle Tucker walks as a free agent. I mean, that's a fairly disappointing season, I think, all in all. And I would have a hard time really feeling good about that year myself. I don't know how you feel about that.
Couldn't agree more. I know I said I'd get you out of here on that one. I do have one more as a follow-up, just to pick your mind a little bit. I think we're both in agreement that not only is the NL Central there for the taking, but the Cubs are favored. If you look at some of the like FanDuel, DraftKings, the Cubs are the favorite. It's not a heavy favorite. It's not like the Dodgers who have a stranglehold on the NL West, but the Cubs are the favorite to win the NL Central. And I agree, it would be a disappointment if they didn't win the division this year. And then you brought up the great point that you just look around, there's only so many wild card spots. Like, if you don't win the Central, I don't think it's going to take 95 wins, right? Not even anything close to that to win the Central. And so if you don't win the division, then you're like, okay, so did we have a better record than the Mets, Phillies, Braves, like a combination of at least two of those teams? Did we have a better record than the Dodgers, Padres, Diamondbacks, a combination of two of those teams, and that's where it just becomes increasingly less likely that would be the scenario. I wanted to ask you, Jason, if the Cubs don't win the NL Central, it will be because of what? And I'm not specifically talking like, oh, the Brewers keep being the Brewers. Internally with the Cubs, like if they don't win the Central, it will be because of what? Like whether it's, hey, they banked in on Matthew Boyd having a healthy year and Colin Ray being able to hold down the fifth spot. It just didn't happen. Something with the bullpen, the young bats, PCA didn't quite play up to the expectations. Shaw struggled. Like what do you, if we look back at the end of September, early October, we're like, man, they just didn't get it done this year. What will be the reason?
I think I could kind of see one. I'll take injuries off of it. I think that's just an easy injuries.
It is. It absolutely
right.
Is.
If Kyle Tucker blows out his knee tomorrow, the Cubs aren't going to win the division probably. So I'll take the cheap answer off the table and say that injury is always looming. But if we're moving past that, I think the two weakest spots, the two places that the Cubs are placing the most chips in their basket is one, the starting rotation as it is today. You're and a little bit of the injury I'll allow to bring in with that because you're basically going into the season with Matthew Boyd as your third best starting pitcher, and he is somebody who has never stayed healthy. Now he's never had Tommy John before, so there's a good chance that those two things are correlated, and Boyd is fine. But you're going in with Colin Ray, who's he's fine, I guess, as a 5, but you're going in through your toughest part of your season, and you're going with Colin Ray as your 5. The Cubs' early season is brutal. I mean, it is brutal. It's Dodgers twice, it's Diamondbacks, it's West Coast Strip. I mean, you're punching really good teams for the first month of the season, and you're probably going in with the worst version of your roster before your young players are really settled in, before some of these other prospects are ready to come up. So I think the rotation's one. And the second is just the reliance on young players. And I don't even mean just like rookies. If you look at this team, for the Cubs to succeed, Michael Busch needs to have a good season. PCA needs to have a good season. Matt Shaw probably has a good season. You've got Porter Hodge, who's maybe your best bullpen arm or your second best bullpen arm around Ryan Presley. You have the Cade Horton, Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks crew, which is going to come up and supplement that rotation throughout the season. Got young relievers like Jack Neely, Daniel Palencia, Luke Little, who are probably going to have to play important roles as well. And any injury in the entire lineup is probably being filled in with a top 100 type or a borderline top 100 type. James Triantos, Kevin Alcantara, Owen Casey. These are the guys who are going to come up, Moises Ballesteros. So at every little point, the Cubs young players, they don't all need to succeed, but a vast majority of them need to be pretty decent. And if they aren't pretty decent, those can be a bunch of holes that you can find. If PCA has a sophomore slump, that's going to be a problem. If Matt Shaw doesn't hit the ground running, who's your third baseman? If Kyle Tucker gets hurt, then you're going with Alcantara right off the bat, who I like a lot, but is still going to be young. The rotation, does Ben Brown, John Ricks, Cade Horton, do they have enough innings in them? I think that's the other place. So, I think rotation is the easy answer. I think just that glut of young players, and I like the Cubs developmental team. Yeah. I actually like where they're going with everything, but if they don't succeed, I think we probably look back at their young players as the most likely thing, as what held them back just enough.
Well said, Jason. Always appreciate all the time. Like I said, next time we chit chat on the podcast, the Cubs regular season will be underway. Hopefully we're talking about a couple of wins and then getting ready for some baseball around the bend late March, early April. Again, always appreciate all the time. This has been the Northside Baseball Podcast.